are very good in rote memory. Their ability to memorize facts and information is indeed an advantage that the teacher can use to teach geography, culture, and civics. However, as facts and information become increasingly difficult to manage, the teacher can explore alternative ways. One approach which the teacher can use is the conceptual approach. Based on the constructivist view of learning, the conceptual approach places the children at the center of a vast horizon or field of learning experience where they have opportunities to develop concepts through inductive models. Learning, therefore, ceases to be a matter of forming constructs. That is, configuration of clearly defined ideas which are related to one another.
A video clip will be shown for further understanding.
There are two ways to think about learning. A traditional perspective sees students as empty vessels. Students wait for the teacher to point out the facts and ideas they should collect in their jars. Students hold all the facts in their heads until they dump them out to prove they have retained them. But there's another way to look at learning. In concept-based learning, students begin not as empty vessels, but instead with their own pre-existing ideas, similar to a stone waiting to be sculpted. As we learn, we chisel away at our ideas until they become more sophisticated, clear, precise, complex, and accurate. At the end, we have a profound, well-thought-out idea of our own construction. In the second way of learning, the students are doing the work and benefiting from it, not the teacher. But how do you help students discover and refine these ideas? The secret is simple. Just two words: uncover and transfer. To help students uncover an idea, start with an abstract question. If you're studying the concept of ecosystems, for example, we might start with a question like, what is the relationship between human actions and ecosystems? Have students share their initial thoughts. One might say, people can hurt the environment. That's a good start, but it's not complete. Now, investigate a specific context that illustrates that conceptual relationship. For example, deforestation in the Amazon. From this, students understand that human actions can directly devastate an ecosystem and contribute to the loss of certain species. Transfer is the next step of the process. Introduce a different example that will add a more nuanced understanding than they had before. For example, next you might investigate the effects humans have on oceans. Students will learn that human waste can end up in oceans and harm sea life, also threatening species. This is more of an indirect impact, adding even more nuance and complexity to their understanding. To assess students' understanding of the conceptual relationship, let's transfer again to the Arctic Ocean and have students hypothesize about the impact of global temperatures. Throughout this process of uncovering conceptual relationships and transferring to new situations, students should start to recognize a pattern. Rather than seeing smaller individual ecosystems, students understand the Earth as an entire giant system where human actions may have a great impact. As you introduce more and more examples, students' understanding grows bigger, deeper, and more complex. This deep understanding of how the world works and the ability to transfer ideas to new contexts is an essential skill that allows students to become creators, problem solvers, and innovators.
The nature of the conceptual approach is by forming concepts. Concepts are products of the abstraction of the mind, wherein abstraction means dealing with the ideas that the children have on a specific topic. When the mind works on given facts and information, analyzes them, and puts them into particular groupings, order, or relationship, a construct is produced. A construct will then form a concept. Family, culture, government, heritage, time, environment, peace, rights, and location are the concepts in civics, geography, and culture. Take note that the words listed cannot be represented by a single object the way a chair is represented by a piece of furniture used for sitting, or the concept of a pen as an object used for writing. To represent them, some ideas that are related to one another are used, which we refer to as construct. From the illustration, one can see clearly a well-defined relationship among the related ideas that form the concept. This leads to the abstraction of a concept or a major idea and generalizations which describes it. The generalization which can be drawn from this figure is more definitive.
Family, the basic unit of society. In both examples, one can readily see the concept and generalization is arrived at using inductive pattern, from the specific to general principle. Characteristics of a conceptual approach. It is broad, it is inclusive of several ideas, and it can be understood only after a construct has been completed.
During the planning process, the teacher may use some steps, and these steps are: first, identify the concept to be developed; second, identify the objectives; and third, choose related topics that will necessarily lead to the development of the concept. The teacher of geography, civics, and culture may choose the concept of topography. The teacher identify its concept, and after it, he or she will then think of a possible generalization that can be drawn in connection with the concept of topography. Examples. Number 1. Topography affects the mean of livelihood of the people. Topography affects the people's transportation and communication. Now, the next step that a teacher must do is to formulate the objectives. An example of a general objective that can be drawn is to understand the impact of topography on people. Specific objectives can be then formulated. Depending on the specific objectives drawn, the teacher can then choose the subject matter or materials that can be included in the lesson, as well as the learning tasks that the pupils will go through. In the case of the topic topography, the teacher may discuss with the class through the aid of video, flat pictures, or slides the topography of the mountain province, Central Luzon, and the Visayan Island. The teacher may include a discussion on the means of livelihood of the people, their means of transportation, their clothing, shelter, and etc. These topics will necessarily lead to the formulation of the generalization. We have here the sample unit plan. The concept is about culture. The generalization that can be drawn in connection with the concept of culture is that culture, it is a shared behavior, and culture is a way of life. The objective in general is to understand the nature of culture, and for the specific, where at the end of the unit, the pupils will be able to define culture. Second, discuss the cultural differences of the Efogaos, the Negritos, and the Bajaos. Explain the way of life of the Efogaos, the Negritos, and the Bajaos. Fourth, formulate general statements about them. And lastly, show respect for other people's culture. For strategy, day 1. Launching of the unit. Presentation of the following example of culture: marriage practices of the Bajaos, religious practices of the Efogaos, and economic life of the Negritos. Day 2. Pupils identify the following topics: problems for discussion: culture of Bajaos, culture of the Efogaos, culture of the Negritos. Pupils may raise some scientific guesses about the culture of the above, assuming that a pupils were given enough time to gather data individually or in groups. Day 3. Pupils present the culture of the Bajaos. They formulate conclusions regarding the culture of the Bajaos. Day 4. Pupils present the culture of the Efogaos. They formulate conclusions regarding the culture of the Efogaos. And day 5. Pupils present the culture of the Negritos. They formulate conclusions regarding the culture of the Negritos. Pupils can formulate generalization about the culture similar to the following: culture is a shared behavior, culture is a way of life, culture differs from place to place, environment affects the development of culture. From the example, one can deduce the following strategy of the conceptual approach. Number 1, launching of the unit. Second, identification of the concept. Third, identification of the topic, problem, or issue. 4, raising of the hypothesis. 5, presentation of the data. And lastly, number 6, formulation of conclusion and generalization. The preceding discussion show the inductive nature of this conceptual approach. In other words, generalizations are drawn from specific data. Its inductive nature required the pupils in the example to go through the following processes. Classification. The pupils classified examples and non-examples of culture as early as the launching. Grouping. The pupils group all similar examples under one label, culture. Defining or describing. The pupils define culture as observed from the examples. Subgrouping. The pupils group practices into those of Bajaos, Efogaos, and Negritos.
Construct as conceptual frameworks. Using the conceptual approach, the pupils learn to form mental images of related ideas revolving around the concept. These images are called conceptual frameworks. The conceptual frameworks vary from pupil to pupil. Its formation depends on the pupil's experiences, mental ability, and exposure. Thus, the pupils may be given the same classroom experiences but they form conceptual frameworks in varying complexities. Some construct will be simple, while others will be more elaborate. Some will have more insights, while others have fewer insights. Concept of rights, for example, may produce the following conceptual framework in a grade 2 pupil. Rights, down to the human rights and the rights of a child. The ideas are rights to protection from violence, right to government protection, right to leisure, right to be nurtured, right to good health, right to learn good manners and right conduct, right to be born, right to education, right to develop one's talent, right to belong, right to protection from danger, right to express oneself, and right to live in a peaceful community. All these rights related ideas that help the pupils understand the concept of rights. Such understanding deepens as the pupils' experiences inside and outside the classroom expand. Thus, to ensure a deeper understanding of a concept thought in the classroom, the teacher should pay special attention to the careful selection of materials that will help the pupils form conceptual frameworks. Clarity of relationship of materials will ensure quick configuration of conceptual framework and will greatly hasten the precise understanding of the concept being taken up.
Techniques in using the conceptual approach. The teacher may consider the following suggestions in using the conceptual approach.
First, the level of the pupils should be an important consideration. The younger the pupils, the more concrete the examples should be.
A video will be shown about Piaget's theory.
Piaget's theory argues that we have to conquer 4 stages of cognitive development. First, the sensory motor stage. Second, the pre-operational stage. Third, the concrete operational stage. And fourth, the formal operational stage. Only once we have gone through all the stages, at what age can vary, we are able to reach full human intelligence. 1. The sensory motor stage, ages birth to 2. In the sensory motor stage, we develop through experiences and movement our 5 senses. Our brain wants to see, hear, smell, taste and touch as much as possible. First, we start with simple reflexes, and soon after we develop our first habits. From 4 months old, we become aware of things beyond our own body, and then as we get older, we learn to do things intentionally. A key milestone is the development of working memory, or in Piaget terms, our realization of object permanence. Before that, our mum can show and then hide a teddy, and we would think it's gone. After, we understand that objects continue to exist, even when we can't see them. We start becoming curious about everything. We want to smell flowers, taste food, listen to sounds, and talk to strangers. To explore more, we move. We learn to sit, crawl, stand, walk, and even to run. This increased physical mobility consequently leads to increased cognitive development. But we remain egocentric, meaning we can perceive the world only from our own point of view. 2. The pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7. Our thinking is mainly categorized through symbolic functions and intuitive thoughts. We have lots of fantasies and believe objects are alive. As we are not able to apply specific cognitive operations, Piaget calls this stage pre-operational. We learn to speak and understand that words, images, and gestures are symbols for something else. When we draw our family, we are not concerned about drawing each person to scale, but rather with their symbolic meanings. We love to play pretend, which allows us to experience something new and learn a lot. At around age 4, most of us become very curious and ask many questions. We want to know everything. We can call it the birth of primitive reasoning. Piaget calls it the intuitive age, because while we realize that we have a vast amount of knowledge, we have no idea how we acquired it. Our thinking in this stage is still pretty egocentric. We think others see the world like we do, and still don't understand that they see it differently. 3. The concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11. We finally discover logic, and we develop concrete cognitive operations, such as sorting objects in a certain order. One example of this is inductive reasoning, which means that if we see someone eating a cookie, we can draw a conclusion and then make a generalization. And we now get the concept of conservation. We understand that if we pour orange juice from a normal glass to a taller one, the amount stays the same. Our younger sister will pick the taller glass, thinking she gets more. By the same logic, we only now can understand that if 3 plus 5 equals 8, then 8 minus 3 must equal 5. Our brain learns to rearrange our thoughts, to classify and build concrete operational mental structures. For example, we now know that we can reverse an action by doing the opposite. Excited by our new mental abilities, we apply them in conversations, activities, when we learn to write, and in school. As a result, we get to know ourselves better. We begin to understand that our thoughts and feelings are unique and not necessarily those of others. That means that we learn to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. 4. The formal operational stage, age 12 plus. Once we become teenagers, we become formally operational. We now have the ability to think more rationally about abstract concepts and hypothetical events. Our advanced cognitive abilities allow us to understand abstract concepts such as success and failure, love and hate. We form a deeper understanding of our own identity and our morality. We now also think that we understand why people behave the way they behave, and as a result, can become more compassionate. Our brain can now do deductive reasoning, which means we can compare two statements and reach a logical generalization. Our new mental skills allow us to plan our life systematically and prioritize, and we can make assumptions about events that have no necessary relation to reality. We can now also philosophize and just think about thinking itself. Our new sense for our identity now also creates egocentric thoughts, and some start to see an imaginary audience watching them all the time. Piaget believed in lifelong learning, but insisted that the formal operational stage is the final stage of our cognitive development.
Following Piaget's stages of cognitive development, the teacher should consider that the pupils in the lower elementary grades should be given more sample concept. Patterns establishing the concepts being studied should be more precise. More examples rather than non-examples should be given. As the pupils' abstraction sharpens in the higher grades, they become more ready to deal with more complex concepts such as government, rights, freedom, democracy, and etc. Second, the scientific steps always come in handy. The teacher should try to be faithful to the use of scientific steps. If at times the pupil wander away from the scientific steps, the teacher should guide them back to it. Third, the concept building approach found in various textbooks may be modified or revised. They are not absolute. The teacher should use his or her creativity in implementing the approach. For instance, the teacher may lead the pupils to form a concept by first using one example at a time, or by using 3 examples of the concept altogether, or present examples and then examples of it. Indeed, an imaginative teacher will find several creative combinations of presentation. Fourth, the conceptual approach can be a great opportunity for allowing pupils to learn by groups, thus enhancing their social skills and reinforcing their values in the group. While concepts may be deeper in a large class discussion, smaller group discussions may be used in the higher elementary grades, where the pupils will be more comfortable to present their views and opinions. Fifth, facts and information are building blocks of concepts. Thus, the teacher should recognize the invaluable significance of facts and information in building the children's capacity to form concepts. Depending on the grade level of the pupils, the teacher should provide them with opportunities to know as many facts and information. However, the teacher should ensure that the pupils do not rest simply in knowing facts and information. The teacher should lead them to classify known facts and information by establishing their similarities, differences, unifying elements.
Conclusion. The conceptual approach is an approach that emphasizes concept building. It places the pupils in a vast field of ideas wherein they are given the opportunities to form conceptual frameworks or constructs that are composed of related ideas, deepen the pupils' understanding of the main concept. The conceptual approach is inductive by nature and as such uses specific examples to form patterns that eventually lead to concept formation. The lesson gradually unfolds using the scientific steps.